Yael Berda is an associate professor of sociology and anthropology at Hebrew University. She's also a visiting scholar at the Middle East Initiative and joins me now live from Tel Aviv. And thanks for doing so. So the world is, of course, focused on Lebanon and Gaza. But what do you see unfolding in the West Bank in terms of what you call a takeover by stealth, an unfolding annexation while the war in Gaza distracts the world?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for having me. These are such volatile times. We're at day 349 of this horrific war that, first of all, must be stopped. And what we're seeing is that basically the government, and particularly Minister Smotrich, is basically carrying out what he calls the decision plan. And that plan is to take over, basically swallow the West Bank into Israel through the takeover of land. And it's being done in a way that people are still calling it annexation de facto or a creeping annexation, which is something that has been going on for at least a decade, if not longer. But now I call it annexation by organizational means, through appointments and regulations and the transfer of authority from the military to the civilian ministry. We're actually talking about the takeover of the West Bank. The idea is first and foremost to prevent any kind of political solution, to prevent a Palestinian state, to prevent Palestinian sovereignty, and basically eradicate the Palestinian national movement, which is who we need in order to have a political solution.
The violent behavior of some of the settlers is one thing, but another is the impunity for them and their actions. Virtually no consequences. I mean, Yesh Din, which is an Israeli human rights group you'd know, looked at I think it was 1,600 cases of settler violence between 2005 and 2023. 3% ended in a conviction, and that surely emboldens those who carry out attacks on and displacement of Palestinians, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. But we need to understand that those numbers have been entirely upstepped now because of what we call here the judicial overhaul or the regime coup. And that means that any kind of legal barriers, be it the judiciary, be it the legal advisors of the government, or even the legal advisors of the military, there is nothing standing in the way of the settlers both in their expansion and in their violence of vigilantes and settler militia. Now, it's difficult to describe, and I'm sure that people say, what are you even talking about? We're talking about people that are literally ruling land and areas in a violent way in order to get Palestinians off their land, in order to prevent a political solution and a Palestinian state.
And you mentioned Smotrich. Netanyahu needs the likes of extremists like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir as well to keep his coalition together. But what has been the overall impact for Israel as a nation of having those two in particular wield such power and such influence over policy?
Well, there's two aspects to it. So one aspect is what we just described, which is what they're doing in the West Bank in order to eradicate any possibility for political solutions and drive people off the land. That's one thing. The other aspect is how Israeli society and the regime is changing at a pace that is unimaginable. Right now, we are at a situation where Ben-Gvir took hold of both the police and the prison authority, is not listening or to the authority of the Attorney General, is literally backing up both violence, torture, both in the West Bank and against Israeli protesters, which is a first for many Israeli citizens whom are experiencing the practices that were reserved for Palestinians in the territory in the territories now being used against Israeli opposition to the government.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned that many of these settlers are reservists in the IDF, and they act against Palestinians while in uniform. They're not just violent settlers, they're effectively the law as they carry out attacks. I mean, what recourse, what defense do Palestinians have as these sorts of attacks increase?
Right now, there's absolutely nothing to stop the vigilantes. The already weak response of the military and the defense ministry is practically non-existent. And what we see is also a failure to respond from Israel's opposition parties, who are just standing with their jaws dropping to this kind of spiraling into an authoritarian regime. And so I think sometimes people don't speak enough about what's happening under the guise of the terrible war with and on Gaza. And also, you know, we're like I said, we're day 349 of this terrible moment with our hostages still not returned, with casualties in the tens of thousands on the in Gaza, and with no prospect in sight that Netanyahu has any responsibility to provide Israel's security, and also to provide to keep Israeli society whole, which is another aspect of this. Now, one of the things that is really important is that as Smotrich and Ben Gvir move to create a possibility where there's no viable political solution, there is an awakening, very late one, within Israeli civilian opposition to new ideas for political solutions, for thinking out of the box from the two-state solution, and different things that are happening. But for instance, a confederation that seems very far right now, but is definitely something that is being talked about as a viable possibility, like the initiative of a land for all. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing is this relationship between what's happening in the West Bank and the annexation and the authoritarian coup and the takeover within Israel.
It's such an important conversation to have. We're right out of time. Professor Yael Berda in Tel Aviv, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.